My name is Florence Coghlan, and I was a fellow in the Global Action Research Collaborative with the International Coalition of Girls' Schools in the 2023 cohort. This video presentation is about the action research project that I undertook across the years of 2022 and 2023. I'm a chemistry, physics and science teacher, and I also have a role in my school leading programs that support pedagogy and digital practices. I work at an ICGS member school in Australia, and it's called All Hallows School. All Hallows is a Catholic girls' school located in the heart of Brisbane City. Brisbane is traditionally known as Meanjin, and the school sits on Turrbal country. And for 162 years, the school has operated in the educational and spiritual traditions of the Sisters of Mercy. Students here really do value their educational experiences, the academic ones, and also the other opportunities that it gives them to learn skills, develop passions, and engage in different parts of the world. We are a girls' school though, and with the many benefits also comes some issues around perfectionism and anxiety and competitiveness around these.
Perfectionism is a big factor in our lives at All Hallows. We have very big expectations of ourselves and we know we can perform to that ability, and that's a great thing. But in the circumstances where something may have affected our learning or something and we don't get the grades that we think we would get, it affects our self-esteem quite badly, and we start putting ourselves down. We start thinking we're not worth it or we're not good enough, which then affects our learning in the future, because then we start just dropping our expectations as we go, and we don't keep striving for the same initial potential as we thought we had, which is...
In 2019, we had some externally collected data that confirmed some of the perceptions and the observations that we had about our students. And that data suggested that while we were scoring quite highly in lots of positive dimensions of motivation, like value of learning, learning focus, and self-belief, we also had a pretty high score for some of the negative dimensions as well, like anxiety, failure avoidance, and uncertain control. And what was really interesting was how all of those dimensions of learning and motivation had an impact on how our students engaged in learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. For us, the pandemic meant lots of different things. It meant learning online, extended absences for students and for teachers, lots of disruptions to learning sequences and schedules, many different personal and familial circumstances, but all of these things really just meant that asynchronous learning experiences were inevitable. Something I found really interesting in this time though was that for a lot of my senior learners, the 17 to 18-year-olds, this freedom to plan and execute their work on their own terms was really, really exciting. As long as they felt like they were supported and there was lots of opportunities for student-teacher dialogue, they seemed to really, really like this autonomy. And as we came back to school and things started to look a little bit more like pre-pandemic times, I really wanted to explore that relationship between the asynchronous learning experience and the autonomy of my learners, and what that was going to mean for this new normal that we were working into. Which is how I landed on my research question. How does an asynchronous learning experience strengthen the learner autonomy of Year 12 students in a girls' school in their approach to chemistry studies? Gratefully, a fellowship in the Global Action Research Collaborative with the International Coalition of Girls' Schools allowed me to examine this relationship. There was a lot of informing literature that defined the learner autonomy that I was hoping to strengthen in my students. A particular framework that guided me was Zimmerman's well-established socio-cognitive model of self-regulation. The model consists of 3 cyclic phases: the forethought phase, the performance phase, and the self-reflection phase. And this model guided both the design of the asynchronous learning program and also the types of learning behaviours that I was looking for in my students for signs of autonomy. The core to this whole asynchronous learning program really was the design of the learning episodes. A lot of research and experiences and observations of my students informed the design of those, and they included a range of stimulus exposure, lots of different reflection opportunities on learning, checking for understanding, consolidation strategies, as well as some interweaved retrieval practice and review. Learning in this program was really fun. Lesson times were totally flexible, and I gave that time back to the students to decide what they wanted to do, when they wanted to do it, and how they wanted to work.
Rather than like having a prescribed thing you do every single class, you had like an option of activities to choose from, and just as long as you completed the set activities by the time they were due, then that was fine, so you were able to work.
My role as a teacher during this program totally changed. I became a resource, I became a coach, a mentor, a facilitator, very much tutoring and working alongside my students as they worked through their own journeys. During lessons, I would also run small group intervention workshops for students who needed support in particular areas on particular skills or topics or different things that I was observing that they might need. I took a mixed method approach to data collection, and qualitatively that included learning surveys, weekly reflections from students, student learning journals, focus group interviews, individual interviews, and lots of lesson observations that I made of how students were working. Quantitatively, I also tracked learning episode completion and submission, also achievement on those, and we did some formative quizzes along the way just to check understanding. The data I collected allowed me to come up with 5 main findings for my project. And it was interesting to see that 4 of these main findings sat directly within the cyclic phase of Zimmerman's model. The first thing that I found was that the asynchronous learning led to more frequent goal setting and individualised scheduling of their learning activities.
So having flexible work time meant that when I was outside of class, I could prioritise my time better, because when I was planning, I could easily know that, okay, in chemistry I'll get this learning episode and this learning episode done. Then that afternoon I can have a break from chemistry and focus on maths or whatever.
Most students at All Hallows do have a competing focus for multiple extracurriculars, I would say, on top of balancing academic achievements, whether that be sport or music or service in the neighbourhood.
You were also able to do other work if you needed to, and if that was your priority at the time, that was allowed and even encouraged, which I think is something lots of people do at in grade 12 anyway, since we're so busy. But it was good that you didn't have to hide it, and that was a permissible thing to do. When the debating grand final was that night and the chemistry external was still in a month or so, I was allowed to work on my debating speech rather than doing chemistry. And I thought that was really valuable, because if I had been made to do the chemistry work at that time, I probably wouldn't have been able to focus on it as much and get as much out of it. Whereas if I was then able to do it in my own time when I felt like I could fully focus on it and I didn't have other things going on in my head, which was really good.
Much like in a flipped model, the students began to realise the value in completing stimulus exposure and new content engagement in their own time, and then utilising teacher and peer support to work on application-based activities. Others actually found that class time was distracting and they weren't as motivated, so they preferred to do the opposite. The flexibility allowed students to choose more cognitively demanding activities at the times when they were most focused, and then opt for more structured work when they were less motivated. Something that changed dramatically through this program was my students' ability to reflect on their learning.
I think that the structure of the classes and the learning, also helped me to identify what I was struggling with easier. In other classes, people or teachers would often ask me, oh, what are you struggling with? What do you need help with? And I'd kind of just be like, everything, or I don't know. Whereas in chem, it was this specific point of this specific learning episode. It was just very much easy for me to pick the things and highlight the things I needed to go back to.
The learning episodes helped me reflect on my learning, because it was actually built into the learning episodes. At the end there'd be a check for understanding section where you'd answer questions to see whether you had comprehended everything in the learning episode, and I found that a really valuable check. And then if I didn't understand something, I'd go back through the learning episode and see where I went wrong. I also found it better.
The fact that students had to submit their learning episodes changed the way that they were thinking and reflecting about learning completion. They started this program with the perception that submitting a learning episode was a completed task rather than a completed learning.
But with reflection prompts and the softness of due dates, the students began to realise that there were benefits to consolidating a topic until they felt properly confident with their responses before they submitted. You can see in this graph how the submission times for learning episodes declined over a period, but that students held themselves accountable to their learning, and they went back, and when they finally felt confident, they were still submitting those learning episodes even well after the due date. I think the students were starting to realise the difference between finishing a topic versus understanding it. Throughout the unit, the number of learning episodes that required intervention from me and from students decreased dramatically, which was indicating that students were developing their ability to self-assess their understanding and perform their consolidation before moving on.
Working this way, asynchronously, allowed students to make a lot more choices about what learning activities to engage with and how they were engaging with them.
During lessons, we had a number of options for things we could engage with, so we could work independently. We could do an individual check-in with Miss Coghlan. Often there were like small group interventions run by Miss Coghlan, where we were allowed to, where she'd say, we're doing a small group intervention on a specific topic, and then if we wanted to, we could go to a separate space and have that smaller tutorial style learning. And then there was also collaborative work with other people in your class. And I really liked that none of these options were compulsory and you were allowed to opt into them. And again, I think there's the fact that you're allowed to opt into them voluntarily means you're more likely to engage with them fully because you want to be there. And I think it does just allow you to know what is best for you and get the most out of things.
I really liked having different options for spending your class time because it catered for different people. Like speaking to my classmates, I found some people who worked better independently would work independently most of the time, but then on a day that they had more energy maybe or just were feeling more talkative, they'd go and work in the group session. So it also meant not only did it cater for different types of students, it catered for people on different days as well as me. I would sometimes feel like just putting in my headphones and doing my own thing.
Without a doubt, this asynchronous learning program resulted in more student collaboration and much less teacher dependence.
Another thing that I learned from the asynchronous learning program was how to collaborate with peers in a way that was helpful rather than competitive. I found that before we started this approach and we were just doing classes in a more general way, some of the peers I was working with were very competitive with how fast they were getting through things or how strong their knowledge was on certain concepts and how well they were doing in just pop quizzes and stuff like that, and I found that really degraded my confidence, whereas when we started doing things this way, it was kind of just more about me and how well I was doing, and I didn't really care anymore because I could see my progress and the focus wasn't on how they're doing.
When we were encouraged to collaborate with others rather than talk to our teacher, I think that definitely encouraged me more to collaborate with others. And for me, that isn't something I instinctively do, so I did need the extra push. But when I got the extra push, I found it was really valuable because people had so many different perspectives on things and did things differently to me. And I learned a lot that I otherwise wouldn't have learned because I probably... the autonomy gave me confidence because rather than being so reliant on my teacher, I was able to work things out for myself, and that built confidence because I felt like, oh, I can do this. I do have the capacity to do this myself.
I think that throughout the year, the validation I was seeking from both my peers and my teacher definitely changed because at the beginning of the year, I was more thinking, oh, am I good at chemistry? Am I dumb? Can I do this? Whereas the validation I was seeking towards the end of the year was very much more targeted. So it would be could you help me with this question, please? Or have I done this question correctly? And then I'd look back on the question, a similar question, and I'd know that I could do it. So the validation I was seeking was more confirmation, I guess, rather than approval, like that I was like smart enough to be in chemistry.
That I found beneficial was that it forced me to like triage my questions and make them more specific and targeted. Whereas like in another class I would have been like, I don't understand this concept, or like, oh, I can't do it. But because I knew I had to make the most of the limited time I had with the teacher, I was forced to come up with targeted questions that were really specific, like this is the step in this question that I'm struggling with, or this very specific concept I don't understand. So that was beneficial for me because it allowed me to self-reflect on my learning and work out like specifically which areas I was struggling with.
Classes, because I knew that our lessons are about understanding rather than just the teacher talking to you and then it was up to you to go and like do the rest of the work, whereas this one was you do the work when you need help, seek teacher guidance. So I feel like I got better at seeking teacher guidance than in all of my other classes because I knew that I could work at my own pace, and then when I didn't understand something, that's when I could ask, and then I got more like understanding out of the lesson.
Having more autonomy and independence helped me grow as a learner, because while it was scary, like being in control of my own learning and the responsibility rested solely on me, it also helped me grow confidence because I felt like the progress I was making was my own and I wasn't like relying on other people to deliver that. And then that confidence like made me feel more confident to ask questions when I had them, take risks with my learning, and also was really beneficial going into exams and things because I felt like this learning is my own. I've truly done it for myself, and I felt like I had a deeper understanding because of that autonomy.
As well as developing more independence and less teacher reliance, I found that I developed a stronger bond with my teacher because the time that I spent with her was very motivating. Like, I know that she could see how I had grown as a learner because of the nature of the classes, and I think that really helped me in my exam because I knew that someone else was confident in me.
While there are so many variables that impact student achievement, there is no evidence to suggest that this particular program had a negative impact on the achievement of my students. Educational research is always challenging given all the different variables that influence learner outcomes and behaviours, but I think that my findings in this research are really promising in terms of the relationship between asynchrony and learner autonomy. Throughout the project, as students were gaining more and more autonomy in their learning, there's also been some evidence to suggest that as they felt more in control of what they were doing, that there was a reduction in their stress and anxiety. I think that's what's next in this project, is looking at that relationship a lot closer and examining whether there is a positive relationship between the autonomy of the students and also their academic buoyancy and their ability to face academic adversity. That's something that's really important to our school as we focus on the academic care of students and the skills that they have to approach their academic lives. I really loved sharing this whole journey of this project with my students. We talk about it all the time, the students who were involved in the study, but also my other classes and students I am teaching now the next year. I share a lot of this journey with them, and it has brought something really different to our relationship as teachers and students, and a mutual appreciation for the role that we both have in the classroom. It feels really collaborative, and we've bonded over it in lots of different ways. It's been pretty special, and I'm really grateful to all the students who've engaged along the way with this.